What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the factory tour. I'm your host, Paul Patterson. I'm joined today by Todd Halverson. You might know him on Twitter at Dynasty Flex. If not, you should go give him a follow. Todd is here from the Dynasty Market Watch podcast. We got into some leagues together this offseason, and so we've been chatting it up. I've listened to their show. I thought it would be a good idea to bring Todd on and have him share some of his insights with you guys. So, Todd, happy to have you here today. How are you feeling?
I'm excited to be here. Yeah, so we started the Dynasty Market Watch podcast earlier this year. We are really talking about market values in that podcast. So a lot about trading, and that's like the fun part about Dynasty for me. So that's what we talk about. So we'll be talking Dynasty market values all off season, but I'm looking forward to chopping it up with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like the show. You guys have had some great guests on too, which is always fun. But I like how you guys talk about trades. I know for some people, it's like hearing about other people's trades is like the least interesting thing ever. But for me, I like hearing what trades people are doing because I like to steal those trades, like the structures of them or even the exact offers, and try to send them out in different leagues and see if they work. So I like getting into those specific scenarios and like really getting into the game theory behind some deals. And we're going to do that here early on because I actually have some situations I want you to weigh in on. But before we do that, this was the first week of fantasy playoffs. It's Tuesday. So yesterday kind of wrapped up that first week. It was a very strange week, as it always seems to be in the fantasy playoffs. And there were some bad beats all around. My friend, in a league with my friend, Thomas Tipple, he lost by 0.02 points on a team where he had Aiden O'Connell and Christian McCaffrey going, and he just came up just short. So I've seen some bad beats out there. This is a safe space, Todd. So if you want to get something off your chest, if you had a bad loss this weekend, I just want you to let it out. Like this is like free therapy. And then I'll go because I have one as well.
Okay, so just to kind of like give you the landscape of my kind of dynasty portfolio. So I'm in 13 dynasty leagues.
Mm-hmm.
5 of them were a full-on tank where I got either the 101 or the 102. One of them I missed the playoffs. So basically I'm sitting with 7 contending teams, 4 of which got the bye. So I had 3 teams in dynasty going this week. One of them, my second league that I started back in 2019, it's a team that's really been pretty dominant over the last few years that has Kupp and Tyreek and Adams and Diggs and Eckler and Taylor and all those guys. That team took the L this past week, and it's pretty disappointing given the age of those players. So that's the one. That one burns a bit. I'm really kind of hurting on that one. And I mentioned a lot of the guys, and you didn't hear a lot of points there. I didn't just lose. I got my ass handed to me. I lost by about 40. I never really had a chance. James Cook, as he was scoring basically every time the Bills got the ball, it was painful. It was painful to watch. He had Brock Purdy too. So I was getting just meleeed. So I was pivoting to other leagues. And so you mentioned a close matchup. I did win one close matchup on the back of Jalen Hurts last night.
Very nice.
I won just by 2 points. Final drive, I actually won by about 1 point. The final drive, Jalen Hurts, he rushed for like 15 yards, and then he threw a pick. I won by about the difference of that rush.
Crazy.
Before he threw the pick. So I had some maybe a bad beat win and a bad beat loss where I just got absolutely meleeed.
That's how it goes, man. I had a league come down to the absolute last second. I'm an Eagles fan, so I was like pretty mad last night about the game, but I was kind of relieved when it ended because I was going up against a guy who had JSN and Devonta Smith, and I thought it was like done, like the game was over. Like I had 11-point lead, a minute to go, and then JSN catches the touchdown, and suddenly my lead is 0.7. And the Eagles are getting the ball back, and they're about to, now they're not going to kneel on the ball. Now they got to throw it. I'm like, Devontae catches one pass, and this is over. Like I've been sitting on this win, counting my chickens before they hatch for 30 minutes now, and all of a sudden I'm sweating to the end. And my son, who's 9 months old, was like asleep on my chest, and so I was like trying not to like yell or
he felt
or shake or anything. Yeah. But my bad beat, I actually tweeted about it, and it was funny because it got like 200 replies, and half of them were like, man, that sucks. Like, I'm in the same situation. And the other half were like, grow up, loser. That's fantasy football. Like, cry about it. And it basically, I led my league in points for the season, but I ended up with the 3 seed. So no buy for me. And then I had Tyreek Hill, Keenan Allen, and Chris Olave all ruled out for the week. There is a trade deadline in this league, so no trades. So all of a sudden, I'm playing Demario Douglas, Kyle Pitts, and Zay Flowers in my lineup instead of those other 3. I have Dak Prescott. I have Travis Etienne. Um, Basically, no one on my team scored any points this week, and I faced James Cook. I actually would have lost to all 11 other teams in the league this week. After leading the league in points, I actually scored less points than literally everyone else. Like, I could have been in the consolation bracket. I wouldn't have won. So that's just how it goes sometimes in a
That's
1 week.
dynasty football in a nutshell. And I think I saw
Yeah.
that tweet from maybe it might have been going into the week when you were talking about how you had to play those guys in replacement of the injured studs,
Yeah.
and people were in the comments dogging you for basically having relying on injured guys that got injured. And I was like, I mean, you just mentioned pretty good players to have on your bench. So I mean, I think you do it about the best you can.
Yeah.
Zay Flowers off the bench is not a bad start, guys.
They were like, oh, he's crying because he doesn't have any depth. And I'm like, who has depth that's as good as Tyreek Hill and Keenan Allen? Like, who am I supposed to have on the bench? They're like, that's how it works. You got to next man up. I'm like, yeah, but they're going to score less points. That's why I'm upset about it. And they did. They did, in fact, score less points. Kyle Pitts and Demario Douglas did not get it done. Zay Flowers caught 1 pass. So it wasn't great. But either way, I'm all right. I've got 9 teams out of 18 in the semifinal next week. So, or yeah, this coming week. So plenty to sweat over ahead of time. But that one I was pretty mad about. And I was the champ last year. So I was like, I really thought I could run it back. And then everything kind of came to a screeching halt for me there. But life goes on. We keep playing. We keep fighting. Cool. So we're going to move along here. And this is where I wanted to talk to you about a couple of trade scenarios because you do the trade podcast. This is the kind of thing you guys talk about. So we're going to get really specific here for a few minutes and get into the specifics of my league. And it's not obviously most of the context of this. If you're listening, it's not going to apply exactly to you, but I think there's some really interesting game theory going on in this situation, kind of trading the now for the later. And that's what I want to get into, kind of the crux of this. So basically, this is in a separate league that I lost this weekend. I wasn't too surprised about it. But either way, this league doesn't have a trade deadline. I was going into this matchup against a team that was much better than mine. And I have a lot of injured studs on the bench. So I was sending out a lot of trade offers. And one offer I got sent back to me as a counter offer was my Jonathan Taylor, Tank Dell, and Kyle Pitts in exchange for Christian McCaffrey, Kyren Williams, and Mike Evans. So this super team somehow was not in the playoffs. They had all 3 of these guys not in the playoffs. So swapping, that's a lot of points. Those are some high end point scorers. They obviously smashed this weekend. But I did not take that deal. I chose to hold on to Jonathan Taylor, Tank Dell, and Kyle Pitts. I thought I was just giving up too much value. But now looking back, if I had taken the trade, I would have won the matchup. So it's just sort of interesting to think through in hindsight. Todd, what is your initial thought there on that trade?
Yeah, so if we just kind of breaking it down for the guys that are on your team that you would have been sending away. So Tank Dell, I think he's pretty undervalued as far as like fantasy calc, keep trade cut goes. He's at wide receiver 26 on fantasy calc. I would have him up around like wide receiver 12. So I am pretty far ahead of market on him. And that's a lot to do with the injury. So sending him away, even though he's injured, is not something I would be interested in unless I'm probably getting a guy from that same tier, which is like guys like Chris Olave, Brandon Ayuk, Puka, Devontae Smith. All those guys are in that same tier for me. Mm-hmm. So if I'm making a 1-for-1 type of swap like that, then sure, I'd be okay moving off of Tank Dell. But you're looking, if we're just kind of thinking about from a value standpoint as we get into the offseason of Jonathan Taylor and CMC being kind of like a wash in a sense, because there's very little time left for CMC, maybe a couple of years. JT still has the most of his career left. I'd probably have CMC ahead, but let's just call them a wash. So now you're looking at Dell and Pitts for Kyren and Mike Evans. I actually made my proclamation that I'm out on Kyle Pitts several weeks ago. And I think he's pretty poor at, like things that help you get above your expected fantasy points per game. Things like forced missed tackles, things like contested catch rates. He's also not dominating targets like he was in the past.
Yeah.
He concerns me, but I still would value him above like a Mike Evans. So yeah, from a value standpoint, the offer you were made was Jonathan Taylor, Tank Dell, Kyle Pitts, and you would have been getting CMC, Kyren Williams, and Mike Evans. I probably would have countered. I probably would have tried to find a way to get to a point. I don't know what the circumstances were, but from a value standpoint, yeah, it would have been a little bit too much of a hit for me, mainly because of the Tank Dell part and how high I am on him with CJ Stroud.
Yeah, so your thoughts kind of mirror mine for the most. I think I harbor a little more hope for Kyle Pitts. It's probably just delusion. My thought is that he's still not totally right from this injury. And some of the film guys I've seen have kind of supported that with like things they point out with how he cuts and things. So I'm kind of hoping that we'll see that. Maybe he'll pick it up a little bit in the
He
off
looks
season.
slow.
But
He just doesn't look very mobile.
Yeah, that's the thing. And so it's like, is he still recovering, or is this like, did the injury like permanently mess him up? And I'm hoping it's the former. But either way, wherever you stand on Pitts, like you said, he still does hold value. And so I think on value, it's pretty far off. I did try to counter. I believe I tried to turn either Pitts or Dell into Jalen Warren. So I tried to kind of downgrade one of the pieces on my end, and that I would have been comfortable with that. He wasn't having it. He was pretty firm. And basically what the other guy said was like, I'm not really worried about these guys next year. Like, I think they'll all be good next year. So like, I'm not desperate to move them. If I don't, if I'm not getting value that I think is fair. And so I think what you see is like, at least right now, while they're scoring points, there's a pretty vast chasm in the valuation of like a CMC and a Jonathan Taylor. And what I think is in the offseason, we're going to see those guys kind of converge. They converged this past offseason. They were valued very closely together. Now CMC's a year older. I don't know why they wouldn't come pretty close together again in startup drafts this offseason. I think Dell's going to be a riser. I think Pitts is always going to have, his hive that are going to keep him up there. So I think it's pretty clear and obvious that when it comes to value, what these guys are going to be worth in the offseason, I'd be giving up a lot. The question is, when is it okay? Like, it's definitely okay to sacrifice some value when it ups your win probability. Cause like the goal of the game is to win. The goal of the game is to like win your league and make money. And so if it's always about accruing value, at a certain point, it's like you're playing a game within the game. That's sort of not the point. We try to accrue value in the interest of like eventually winning. So when you're in a spot where you can win, where do we draw the line on what's enough to sacrifice? And so that for me, knowing I would have won had I made the trade is something I've been trying to figure out. And it's hard for me to pin down.
Yeah. So my kind of line in the sand of where I'm going to sacrifice value is the question I'll ask myself: is this trade going to be the difference in me potentially getting the buy or not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if I'm sitting in week 10, 11, and I'm on the cusp and I'm like, okay, I could maybe sacrifice a little bit of value here, and I'm going to make a move that's going to push me over the top to help me get that buy, or at least put me in position to get the buy, I'm okay with it. A situation like what you're in, where you're already a dog in the matchup and you're basically making a trade, let's call it, to make it a 50-50 or maybe a 55-45 type of move.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, now you have to go win next week too, which is probably going to be a 50-50 matchup. It's not enough. It's not enough for me. I would probably be looking like you, looking to make a fair market value trade, maybe a slight hit, but not a significant hit in value. Whereas you asked kind of where to pinpoint it. Mine is it going to be the difference in me getting the buy or me not getting the buy? If not,
Yeah.
then I can't do it.
I think that's a good way to look at it. Getting the buy, like it's statistically proven. It's by far the biggest thing you can do to give yourself the chance to win. And the situation that I talked about, like in my, bad beat that I had, that's case in point right there. Like I literally led the league in points. So arguably I had the best team in the league and I literally scored the fewest points in the entire league on the first week of the playoffs. Like having a buy is huge. Even if you have a great team, you can get bounced in that first week. And so when you're looking
And
at playoff teams, like you have 3 playoff games in a row, they're all weighted coin flips. The odds of you coming up, heads on 3 of those like those 3 in a row, it's just lower than people think.
and you mentioned, I think Tyreek was one of the guys you had injured. Who was another guy that was
Right.
injured?
Tyreek, Keenan Allen, and
Okay, so
Olave.
let's just
Yeah.
use Tyreek and Keenan Allen for example. Let's
Yeah.
say that they had both dropped their 20 that they normally get,
Yeah.
and you replace like Flowers and I can't remember the other player, maybe a Pitts or somebody. I
Yeah.
think you said that you were the lowest in the league. It may have not even mattered. Like Tyreek
Right.
and Keenan Allen moved into your lineup, scoring their 20 points, probably still sitting where you're at today. So like that's kind of like what
Yeah.
we're talking about with these two players aren't moving the needle quite as much as what everybody thinks.
Yeah.
There's a lot more that goes into it than I mean, if you go look at some of your losses, I mentioned my loss from earlier. I lost by like 40. Wouldn't have
Yeah.
mattered if I lost Herbert on that team. If Herbert had dropped 50, I wouldn't have won that matchup. It doesn't
Right.
matter. Like I needed a lot more things to go my way.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of times one player doesn't matter. In this case, we're talking about McCaffrey. He scored 40. Like, yeah, but that wasn't a guarantee. It's not like he averages 40 points per game. There was no guarantee he was going to get to that number. In fact, it was pretty unlikely he was going to get to that number. He just happened to. And there's no guarantee that, he would continue to succeed. So, the trade wasn't make the trade, you automatically win the game. In hindsight, yeah, that's what would have happened. But in reality, like you said, it would have been close. Like I probably would have been a slight favorite, but it wouldn't have been a lock. He had Justin Jefferson, he had TJ Hawkinson, he had a lot of really good players on his team. He was the higher seed. So, it would not have been like a blowout by any stretch. So that's kind of where you have to draw your own line of like what you're comfortable with. Ultimately, I thought I was sacrificing too much in the future, and I just decided to let the chips fall. It didn't go my way, but I don't think I would have done it differently if I could go back. I
Yeah,
think I think I made the right call, and sometimes that's how it goes. You can't win every league every year.
yeah, I think you made the right decision. So I made a couple of win now trades earlier this year, and it just kind of like plays into the question of does it make sense to make those win now deals? And so like a couple of those that I made early in the year, and brace yourself because these sting. So just like be
Oh yeah.
prepared here. So I'll start off a little softer and then we'll get to the worst one. So the first one was I traded away Rachaad White, um, I think a first, and I got like Pollard in a second. That was kind of the
Mm,
gist of the trade. So I basically dropped
painful.
down. This was like week 2 or 3, like right after Pollard had a pretty good start to the season, and Rachaad White kind of starting to feel like nothing at that point. I was offering him in leagues for like a mid-second, nobody would even accept it.
Right.
So at the time, it felt like a big win. Like it felt like maybe a value win and a win now win. And here we sit today. I have the worst. I have the worst player, the older player, and the worst draft pick. So that one's a tough one. And so it kind of plays to the fact of like, just because you feel like it's a win now trade, how much does it
Mhm.
really move the needle? And
Yeah.
also take into account the fact that there's the chance that you lost on the win now player. Like you're taking the win now, but it's not actually the win now player. So
Right.
here's the other one that I made, and this is the one where you need to brace yourself. I had Jameer Gibbs,
Oh god.
and um, arguably the best team in the league. He wasn't doing anything for me around like week 5 or 6, and I decided, you know what, Cup's back. He went off for 20 his first game back. He's the guy. He's going to be the guy in the playoffs that is going to make me unbeatable. So I swapped out Gibbs for Cooper Cup straight up, and we can just have a funeral
Oh
for that trade. Yeah.
man, that hurts. That's feel physically uncomfortable hearing about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So that team is still alive. I am
Yeah,
playing next week.
that's good.
But I don't have Jameer Gibbs, and I do have Cooper Cup. So
Right.
he helped
Yeah.
me. He helped me win this past week, though. That's a team where I had the second most points in the league and didn't get the bye. Kind of similar to kind of what you had going on.
Right.
Kind of playing into the fact that I think that every league should be median scoring. Play your head-to-head, play your median league matchup, and I think that maybe pulls out some of that variance that we deal with.
Yeah, it
Because
definitely
those
does a
teams
little
with
bit.
yeah, those teams with the top scoring teams that don't get the bye are just
Mhm.
painful.
Yeah. Yeah, some teams even I mean, some leagues even just have a rule like top scoring team gets the bye, and then the other bye goes to the, best record that's not the top scoring team. I think that's fair too. The goal is to score points. So sometimes you don't score them in the right sequence, or sometimes, you don't play good defense. That's just how it goes. So I have one more scenario. This is out of the blue. So I apologize to spring this one on you, but it came up today. And it's actually like kind of the opposite of the thing that I talked about a second ago. Basically, I'm in the semifinals in a league with no trade deadline. And this is a situation where I could potentially add roster value to my team, but I'd be certainly giving up an advantage in scoring. So I do have Christian McCaffrey in this league, and there's another semifinalist. He's on the other side of the bracket, so we wouldn't meet until the final, assuming we both get there. He wants to off. He basically said, "Hey, what would I have to give you on top of Bijan Robinson for Christian McCaffrey?" And I mean, Bijan Robinson, he's still my dynasty RB1. The idea of rostering him in another league sounds great. I love Bijan Robinson. I think he's going to be awesome, but he is not scoring 25, 30 points per game like Christian McCaffrey is. This is a pretty tough league. The teams that are left are all really good. If I send that guy, Christian McCaffrey, his team is, insane. So the question, like, this is not a trade I would make straight up right now. In most scenarios, I'll take Bijan over CMC, but right now, I need a bonus on top. I just don't know what that bonus should be. I don't know what is a fair amount, just considering the win probability I'd be giving up. Where I don't even know where you start a negotiation like that.
So the first kind of question that I'd be asking myself is, what's my percentage probably to win this week?
Mhm.
And then I'm perfectly okay going into a championship with like 50-50 type odds, or 40-60 type odds. So like, what's your odds this week to win?
I'd probably say like 55%. Like, it's pretty close, I'd say right now. Maybe a little more, 55, 45,
Okay, so
in
you
my
you go
favor.
from CMC to Bijan, you're probably like 45-55, or maybe just
Yeah, something
around
like that.
50-50. So then the next thing that I would kind of be thinking about is, like you said, what's reasonable on top. When I'm trading within a tier, which I would say for me they're about the same tier, CMC and Bijan,
Okay.
it would almost be like a make me move scenario. Like, you came to me,
Yeah.
you're wanting my CMC to help you win. That price is about a second to me.
Okay.
And in this scenario where he's probably desperate,
Mm,
give me some like random junk on top that who knows if I'll ever use it. But like, let's think about like 6 weeks ago, Chase Brown. Chase Brown was probably on some waiver wires for some leagues. I know I
right.
traded him in a deal where I just like literally threw him in
Yeah.
because they asked for him. I was like, well, whatever, you can have him. And here we are. He's actually kind of useful. And that's the type of guy that maybe you throw in. If we just like look at fantasy calc running backs, let's just go way deep. Sean Tucker, there's one. Probably useless. Probably will never be usable. But who knows? Maybe there's a
Right.
week in a year or two where you can get him thrown in. So for me, it's probably a second. In this scenario, late in the season, desperation, I'd probably ask for a couple treats on top. But I think a
Okay.
second is what it would take at minimum.
Okay. I had my sights set a little bit higher. I think for the price of a second, I'd rather have I think I value my peace of mind higher than I value a second. Just going into a matchup knowing I have a guy who can score 40 points is pretty nice. I'm not sure that that's rational. I think your take's probably more rational. I'll tell you what I asked for, and I didn't think it was reasonable. I didn't think he would accept it, and he did not. I said, give me Bijan and DJ Moore, and I'll give you Christian McCaffrey. He said no. He countered with Bijan and DJ Moore for CMC and a 2025 first.
My thought initially
Yeah,
was when you said DJ Moore, can I throw back a second?
right. I actually don't have a second this year or next year. He tried to get me to send a first. I said I'm good on that. So at this point, we're at a stalemate. Probably won't get a deal done. He doesn't have like any draft picks, and he doesn't have much on his bench by way of depth. It's a pretty like top heavy roster, pretty leveraged for this season. He is the one seed, but I don't know if I would necessarily say like he's the favorite to win the league. I think it's a pretty much a toss up between my team, his team, the team he's facing this week. They're all pretty stacked. And so I think he's definitely feeling a little bit of heat there. And yeah, I mean, I love the idea of Bijan, but basically what I said to him is, I play in 18 leagues. I'm in a portfolio of leagues. I think Bijan is definitely approaching a point of being undervalued. I think I can add shares of Bijan in leagues where it's not actively sabotaging my chances of winning money.
Sure.
And so for me to be, convinced to do it in this particular spot, I think it would have to be a real wow me type of offer. And so I think it probably won't happen, but definitely an interesting discussion.
Yeah, 2 2s is probably what I would be asking for, or 2 2 type values. Obviously, he doesn't have picks. So when we're talking about twos, like from a running back standpoint, or let's use receivers. Let's run down the gamut here. Jameson Williams. I'm not like a big Jameson Williams fan, but like, Jameson Williams and then like a little something on top. Yeah, I'd be okay with that. This is one of those where it's a lot easier for me to say it when I'm not in the situation. But when you're in the actual slot to make it happen, it's a little tougher to pull that trigger. So I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the way you're approaching it is definitely the pragmatic way, thinking of it through probabilities, like how much is my projection going to change for this week? CMC plays the Ravens this week. Like that's not a cake matchup. Travis Etienne scored 5 points against them. It's certainly not a guarantee that he's even going to be the difference this week. So it's one of those things where
So
maybe
one thing,
Mhm.
one thing
Go
I'll
ahead.
push back on you a little bit, and you mentioned being in like a portfolio of leagues.
Right.
That's almost like a reason why I would do it.
Mhm.
You're in, I think you said 9, maybe 10 semifinals this upcoming week.
Yeah.
The odds of it actually mattering are pretty slim, like we've talked about. I think you're going to show a tweet or mention a tweet from Jacob. Maybe we can go ahead and talk about that. But I just think that the portfolio aspect that you play in,
Yeah.
I'm in 13 leagues, so I don't quite get to that point. I think it's like around 18, 20, 25 leagues is probably when you truly are playing like portfolio. But I think you're to the point at like 18 where this is the type of trade that I probably, if I can get 2 2s or
Yeah.
twos and some stuff. It doesn't sound like there's quite the type of deal, but just from a portfolio standpoint, I think that's where I would be trying to make it.
Yeah, that's fair perspective. I'm still gonna think about it a couple more days to kind of mull it over. I know he'd be down to restart the conversation if I was interested in doing that. But yeah, I'll talk about the tweet. I had screenshotted this tweet from Jacob Sanderson, who's been on the show a couple times, because I thought it really encapsulated this idea of the win now and the trying to get that one player that you need to win. He tweeted, "Going into tonight, my teams with Bijan Robinson, 0.4 points, are projected to go 6-1, while my teams without Bijan Robinson, 0.4 points, are projected to go 8-12. Your matchups are rarely decided on the margins, which is why extremely short-term trades or patching holes is negative expected value." So basically going undefeated with Bijan playoff teams, even though he scored no points, and his teams without Bijan doing much worse. That kind of just shows like, you know, you can literally take a 0 at what is supposed to be like a really strong spot on your roster, and it can make like no difference to how your team does.
Yeah, it's a complete it's encapsulation of exactly what we're talking about here. So I had one I mentioned I had 3 teams going off this past week, and my one that had Bijan, it didn't win. So I was 0-1, but I lost by about 40 points. I was the favorite in the matchup. Bijan was one of the guys that went for 1 point or so. Even if he had gone for 30, I still lose that matchup. So
Right.
it's not like we're talking about here. One player isn't making a big change. Like, let's just make the example. It's a half PPR league. So even if I had traded Bijan for CMC straight up, so like I was in a type of trade like what you're a negotiation like what you're in, but I don't have to add anything. I can just get CMC. I still lose my matchup.
Yeah.
So I think I actually saw this on I think it was dynastydaddy.com that has this feature where you can see the closest matchups. I think that's where you can find them, and the closest matchups of the season, like the top 5. And at one point around like week 10 or 11, I found that function on their site, and I started looking at some of my leagues, and like a few of my leagues, there were only a handful of single digit matchups the entire season. It
Right.
blew my mind. Like I knew that was the case, but when you start seeing it on paper, that's what really kind of changes the game. Like there was a couple leagues where there was like 3. We were like a week 10 or 11. There were like 3 matchups that were in single digits. It just
Yeah.
doesn't happen as much as people think.
Yeah, exactly. It's not, I mean, you do see the screenshots like I lost by 0.1. I lost on the Jared Goff stat correction. Like it does happen. There's a lot of leagues out there, but overall, you shouldn't expect your matchup to come down to that. Even if the projection says you're within 2 points of each other, it's usually not how it's going to play out. I've got two more anecdotes on this point, and then we'll move on. One of them is in the league that we talked about first, where I declined the McCaffrey Kyren Evans deal. I lost by about 20 in that league. My opponent started Tyreek Hill. He lives in a weird time zone, and he was asleep when Tyreek Hill was ruled out, and he did not sub him out of his lineup, and he beat me by 20 points. So there you go. Another stud taking a 0 in the lineup, still a blowout. I was hoping Calvin Ridley would score 30 PPR points to save me, but he did not.
I saw your tweet.
He did it once this year. I thought maybe, but no,
after
he
week
didn't.
1, that wouldn't have been such a ridiculous thing to ask for.
No, but unfortunately, no. The ref said no. They didn't even. They said not even close. He can't even have the touchdown to make it look, a little bit better. Other anecdote: I was in a league where my friend, he was against me in the semifinal or this past weekend quarterfinal. He made a big trade before the game. He sent Gibbs and then kind of a bunch of picks to get Jamar Chase, Travis Etienne, and Nico Collins, who then combined to score fewer points than Jahmyr Gibbs scored on the week. So he was trying to upgrade 3 spots on his lineup, and they're all young players. It's not like it's bad to have them. But he tried to upgrade 3 spots by sending one guy, and that one guy outscored all 3 of them. So there's just so much variance in 1 week. And so it's really hard to try to. Yeah.
You mentioned it over. That's why I'm really just trying to play the value game and accumulate value. Doesn't mean I'm trying to like rip off in a trade. It's just that I'm trying to make sure that I'm getting players that I think will ascend in value and not players that are declining. And I think this year was a good reminder of that with guys like Eckler, guys like Kupp, Devontae Adams, who's really not been that bad, but got those types of players. It's a good reminder that the difference between them and other guys in that wide receiver 2 range aren't that vast of a difference, and I can potentially get someone that will increase value instead of decline in value.
Yeah, absolutely. So keep it all in perspective. Don't be too emotional with your trades. Trust me, it's hard to do. Like I've definitely been in my bag about some deals that I did or didn't make the past couple weeks, but you got to try to, make moves with your head, and knowing these probabilities and how crazy things can get is one way to kind of just keep it in perspective. So that was great. I appreciate your input on all those deals and non-deals. We're going to move on here to a segment. We're going to talk about a few running backs because I frankly just don't know what to do with them in Dynasty. They're all these 3 running backs. They're all like smashing in fantasy, despite not really being drafted very highly at all. But they all have some kind of red flag or flaw in their game. And these 3 guys are Kyren Williams, James Cook, and Rachaad White. So I just want to figure out like how we're supposed to rank these guys, how we should value them in trades, just given what they're currently doing for fantasy teams and what their future outlook might be. So if there's one of these guys you'd love to start with, it makes no difference to me. They're actually ranked identically on Keep Trade Cut and Fantasy Calc. All 3 of them are all in the same spot on both sites. But currently, Kyren Williams is valued as the RB8, James Cook as the RB11, and Rachaad White is the RB12. So they're all Dynasty RB1s at this point. What are your thoughts?
Let's go Kyren Williams first.
Okay.
And The reason I want to go him first is because he's a little bit different than Rachaad White and James Cook from a draft capital standpoint. So what was Kyren Williams a 6th or 7th rounder?
Something like
That weighs in pretty heavily to how I'm historically thinking about these guys. So like think about James Robinson at UDFA. Think about some of these running backs that have popped and then been usurped by running backs with draft capital.
that.
And
Yeah.
it kind of comes out of nowhere, like a Michael Carter. You think, okay, this guy could be the future starter, and then bam, they draft a running back in the 2nd round. The Rams are interesting because first off, they don't have a lot of draft capital. They've invested in Akers. They obviously invested in Gurley back several years ago. And I think they're to the point now where they're just like, we're not dealing with high drafted running backs. They drafted Darrell Henderson, I think, in the 3rd. And I really feel like they maybe just say, screw drafting these guys. And they have a really good one that seems to be good in Kyren Williams. So I hate to be like prisoner of the moment and say Kyren Williams isn't like all the others, but I'm going to say Kyren Williams isn't like all the others because
Right.
of some different scenarios that are playing out. So I think Kyren Williams is properly valued. Like, I mean, Jonathan Taylor's RB7 right now. ETN's RB5. In the offseason, if people kind of forget about the fantasy points per game that Kyren Williams was scoring and he starts trickling down a little bit, ETN or Taylor, if I could trade for Kyren and add a couple seconds, or, you know, I think historically we've really looked at trying to do like 1-2 swaps.
Yeah.
Those aren't getting done as much anymore. Like, I think back 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, I was always doing those types of deals. I was always like trading a Taylor, getting a Kyren plus a first, and I'll send you a late second. And people are holding their first more close to the vest now. So I think the move is probably just acquiring a couple of seconds. And like I said, like asking for some junk on top that may or may not ever be worth anything.
Right.
But yeah, that's something that would interest me in the offseason with Kyren.
Yeah, I'm curious, to see where his value is going to go. It seems like after what we've seen with James Robinson, Damian Pierce, Michael Carter, like there are going to be some people that are a little bit leery of him. I don't know if that RB8 price is going to hold, like you said, once the season's over and they're not seeing 19 fantasy points per game in their lineup every week, or whatever it is. So I think that value might fall a little bit, but I honestly do think that he does belong in the top 12. I do think that that's fair. I mean, you just look at the landscape and it's like, yeah, we don't know for sure that Kyren Williams is a locked in workhorse next season, but like, who do we know that about? Honestly, like outside of the top 12 or so guys, it gets really ugly really fast. Behind Kyren, like, okay, Kenneth Walker, you can make an argument for Kenneth Walker over Kyren Williams. I don't think he has the same kind of ceiling. I think he's a better player. I think like he's a little bit safer in the sense that I think his talent is a little bit more of a sure thing. But I don't think that he's likely to ever have a 20-point per game season just based on how he's deployed. Josh Jacobs getting old, Saquon Barkley, pretty old. DeAndre Swift, I don't know where he's going to play. I don't know if he's going to have that kind of a role either. So, it's not like there's these for sure players that are behind Kyren where we're sacrificing value insulation for production. It's like Kyren's just giving you more production, and has the same kind of value insulation as most of the guys behind him.
Yeah, so then the others that you mentioned, Rachaad White, James Cook, I think that they're kind of from a value situation, probably pretty similar, just diluted a little bit. They're different for me in the sense that they do have that draft capital. So like, I don't expect the Bills to draft another 2nd round running back this offseason. Do I expect James Cook to keep getting 27 touches per game? Probably not. And if he does, I think any running back getting 27 touches per game, it's probably not very sustainable for them, whether they're the size of Derrick Henry or the size of Devon Achane. I don't think it really matters. 27 touches per game is going to wear you down a little bit. So Rachaad White, James Cook, if we just kind of clump them together, they're productive now. I think in the offseason, we see the drop in value from a startup perspective, but not necessarily from a running back ranking perspective. Like, I think after that Kyren Williams, Kenneth Walker spot, I think you basically just see a drop off, and those guys start going in like sixth, seventh round of startups, essentially,
Right.
because nobody wants to touch them.
Yeah, I think the tricky part is definitely ranking them relative to other positions. I think at running back, it's pretty easy, at least for me. I honestly think all three of these guys belong in that top 12 because, like I said, it's not inspiring afterward. You know, you can say Javonte Williams is a better talent. I don't know that that's true. I don't know for sure what his workload's going to look like in the future either. You know, you can say you like Isaiah Pacheco, you can say you like whoever, but nobody really after that point is assured of anything. And even if they're more talented, potentially, I don't know that they'll find themselves in better situations for scoring fantasy points. So
Yeah,
as
and
far,
I really don't
yeah,
even I really don't even think that like Rachaad White is assured of anything. I think he's
mhm,
probably not that good.
right,
And so they could very easily bring in a guy off the street, or a free agent, or they could bring in a third or fourth, fifth rounder to compete with him. Um, and so if I have a Rachaad White, I have a James Cook, tearing back to guys like Tyjae Spears, Brian Robinson, you mentioned Pacheco, tearing back to those guys
mhm,
is of interest to me. If I can add a little bit of something on top, a, a little bit on the grosser side of things, if I could tear back into James Conner and really add something substantial. So, um, and I don't know off the top of my head, I don't know what that substantial thing is, but I think you can get one more year of James Conner. But like, think about the trade as like you're trading for a receiver, and James
right,
Conner's the ad. So if we're thinking about like Christian Watson, all right. So if you're like trying to deal like a Rachaad White, Christian Watson type deal, give me Connor within the deal. Like, you're targeting Connor, but you're going after um, another receiver of some more value on his team, and then you
okay,
kick back something within the deal. So it's like a 2 for 2. I get the value of Watson, which is kind of his
right,
value is kind of starting to slide, but then I have Connor to backfill that running back
mhm,
slot for at least probably a year, and who knows, like. If I told you that Connor outscored Rachaad White
yeah.
next year, points per game, like, would that really shock you that much?
Um, I guess not. I like the creativity of it. I think the players are just too gross for me to see it clearly. But I get
That's
what
the
you.
way it gets done, is by having some gross players.
I
If
get
they're
what you're
too
getting
sexy,
at.
then nobody wants to do the deal.
I don't think that would be my first inclination with those guys, but like I definitely see where you're coming from. Um, I like the idea of either trying to just turn them into draft picks or trying to turn them into like young stud wide receivers that have lost value, like a T. Higgins or a Drake London or something like that. To me, that's more interesting just because if those guys don't get replaced or they don't get supplemented in some significant way, I do think they're going to be significant pieces next season. And so like, I definitely get trying to move them for something that's more insulated, but I would want that to be like kind of more of a surefire asset. If you can make that type of a deal in, I don't know. I don't know if it would be better to make it after the draft or before the draft. So ignore me on that one.
So
Um,
some guys that
but
had
yeah,
like significant performance, whether it was because they were actually talented at football or not, but they were putting up fantasy points
yeah,
like this time last year. Like, you think about like Ramondre Stevenson. Um,
right,
I don't know, but I don't know exactly how Najee Harris finished the season, but he was at least valued a little bit more than he is today.
right,
Think about some guys like that have just absolutely plummeted. That those are the types of these. This is that range. You know,
right.
in redraft we talk about the RB dead zone. This is like the dynasty dead zone of running back, where I'm just probably trying to get out of.
Yeah, I definitely get the hesitance. I don't think so. To be clear, Kyren Williams, I don't think he is especially talented. He some things he does look good in. Like I think he's graded pretty high on PFF. He's certainly competent in all phases. I don't think he adds much of anything as a rusher. I'd say at best he's like average. But
Sure.
he's not explosive. We know he has the athleticism of an offensive lineman. So I don't think that from a talent perspective, we should have a lot of faith in him. It's just, is the situation going to hold up? Rachaad White, yeah, I think is a very good pass catcher. He's a good athlete. Don't think he's a very good rusher. James Cook seems to be good. He seems to be a good rusher, seems to be a good pass catcher. The question is, is the coaching staff actually going to give him a high opportunity share? He has had those high touch games, but if you look at his usage, he's only had over 50% of the rush attempts once in the past 5 weeks. He hasn't run over 50% of the routes in a game since week 8. Like, it's more about the game scripts for the Bills lately than it is about Cook getting a better role. Compared to like Christian McCaffrey, it's not even close. Like, McCaffrey's running way more routes. He's rushing a much higher percentage. He gets goal line work. So when you're looking at Cook, like, the ceiling isn't really, there's not really a ceiling there with Cook. So it's interesting. I think he's the best talent of the three overall, but I think he actually has the lowest ceiling of the three because I don't think he'll ever actually be utilized in the same way that we have seen White and Kyren being utilized.
Yeah, the touchdowns for James Cook, like when they bring in Latavius Murray, when they get inside the 5, that's pretty disheartening. You mentioned PFF rush grades. Kyren Williams is 3rd in PFF rush grade. James Cook is 5th. So they're both performing really well. Rachaad White tumbles down a little bit further. He's 17th. So not terrible, but like you said, like average. He's just usable.
Yeah. So I think with these guys, what I'd like to do is consider, first of all, rookie picks. Like, what's the worst rookie pick you'd be willing to accept for any of these guys? And then I'd also like to talk about maybe some straight up swaps at other positions. But let's start with picks. Obviously, you're not moving any of these guys for something outside of the first round at this point, right?
Yeah, so I would need a late first, especially for James Cook and for Kyren Williams. Excuse me. I would need a late first, especially for James Cook and Kyren Williams. Rachaad White's a little weird for me. Like, I'm not really sold on him. I just think they could very easily bring someone in. Sounds like you're a little more in on him than me. I would definitely take a late first for him.
Okay.
And I'd probably be really looking to get out from Rachaad White in the offseason.
I gotcha. I'm honestly not sold, or I'm not sold that I'm not sold. Like, I genuinely put him on the show sheet because I don't know what to like. I don't know what to think. A lot of the time I can formulate my own takes and kind of have my own opinion. This is one of those situations where what they're doing is just like so out of line with what I expected that it's like, it's just, my brain has not properly calibrated to what's going on here. And I think I can see through with the James Cook thing. Like, I don't think that what he's doing the last 4 weeks is in any way sustainable. He needs a legitimate role change if he's going to actually be a high end RB1 over a full season. I don't believe this is kind of like what Pollard was doing last season. And it was like, okay, well, he can be the guy if Zeke's gone, and then he can maintain the fantasy points by growing his role. But like, his efficiency last year was just not possible to sustain. Like, he was scoring these touchdowns, but not getting any goal line touches and all that. So I don't know. Maybe James Cook can eventually do that. He's not quite as big as Tony Pollard is, and even Pollard hasn't really held up to that situation. I don't know exactly why. So with Cook, I'm pretty comfortable just moving off of him. Like you said, late first is fine with me. I think after his recent performances, I'd be aiming like, get me into that 107, 108 range. Maybe I don't have to settle for just the very, very late first, or maybe I can get a second thrown in on that. I'm definitely going to try to exploit his value. With Kyren, I'd be aiming higher. Even I think just his perception right now is just so high, and I don't really think it's going to change for at least a couple of months, because people are going to be riding that high. I remember James Robinson being dealt after that season. He was valued really highly, and it didn't come crashing down until ETN got drafted. So for him, I'd be aiming more in that mid first range. I think you can get there. Maybe you kick something a little bit extra back, but if you can use Kyren to propel yourself into that like 106 area, I think that's a huge win, because you're going to get a phenomenal prospect there, and somebody who's going to have a ton of value installation, ton of upside. So that's probably where I'd be aiming with Kyren.
Yeah, 105, 106. I think as things stand today, that's kind of like where the tier break is. And obviously, that's going to change a lot over the offseason, but I think the tier is basically like you got Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison Jr., Drake May, Jaden Daniels seems to be around going in the top 10 of NFL drafts. So you got to include him. And then you got Brock Bowers and Malik Neighbors. So that's like the top 6, I think, right now.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, if I'm trading Kyren Williams, I want one of those guys. I think what I'd really be looking to do, though, is get 2 pieces out of Kyren Williams and get 2 opportunities, because I know Kyren Williams is good. There is the percentage chance that he loses some value or loses some opportunities next year. But there's also the chance of me taking like a 105 or 106 and they turn into Quentin Johnston. And that's scary. So I think getting 2 opportunities at it makes me feel more comfortable. So like if it ends up having to be like, okay, I have to get the 109 and something, that's probably what would be of most interest to me. Even though it does feel good to say like I got Malik Neighbors or I got Brock Bowers on my dynasty team.
Right. Yeah, definitely see that side. I think both of those options are solid. And this isn't to say you have to rush out and sell Kyren Williams. Like I think you have time. I think he could even ride this out and survive it. But I think the most prudent thing, if you're able to get that type of value, is going to be to cash out, because I don't think you're missing out on the next Christian McCaffrey. And I think that whatever you're going to get, obviously not going to be a guarantee to hit, but a player that's going to be a guarantee to hold a certain amount of value is probably going to have a higher value ceiling overall. Like a rookie coming in that top 6 is going to have like top 2 round potential. I don't think Kyren can get there like at this point, because by the time he does this a second time, he'll already be entering, the AJ Peck's range for running backs. Like his value ceiling is kind of capped, like right around where it currently is. So I do think you're opening yourself up to a little bit more overall upside if you grab one of those top 6 players, but it could definitely be a little bit safer to, like you said, take maybe a later first, an extra piece on top, and kind of spread your risk out over multiple assets. That also works for me. But all these guys, just to recap where I stand, I think they all belong in the top 12 at running back. But in terms of where they fit into the overall landscape, I do think that they maybe fall a little bit later than you would expect a top 12 running back to fall. And there's a lot of like wide receivers and quarterbacks and tight ends that you could probably get in deals for them that I would like. And so, for me, T. Higgins, Drake London, maybe Nico Collins. I know you're very high on Nico Collins. Where would you fit him in amongst these guys?
I have Nico in that like tier of wide receivers, like 10 to 15. I think we mentioned easily. I'm taking Nico Collins over any of these running backs.
Okay. Yeah. So, I think that's something you could get done in a lot of leagues.
Yeah. I mean, especially Rachaad White and James Cook. Kyren Williams, I do, like I said at the beginning, I do kind of separate him a little bit. I view him as more like the top 9 and a couple rounds different of startup ADP. Whether that means I would take him there or not, I think that what I'm saying is like that's where I think the ADP will be.
Right.
So I'm not going to take like a bath on value from Kyren to Nico, but I would be looking to make that sort of swap, especially at running back, where I'm probably looking to more so have less value built into my running backs,
right.
Unless I'm like at an anchor RB type of build.
Nico and James Conner for Kyren Williams.
There we go. So I'm basically getting to get a year of running back production. It's probably not going to be as good as Kyren Williams is, but it's going to be probably a year of running back production of guy that I can use. And then I have the longevity of Nico and somebody that I think from a value perspective is going to be building value versus where he is today, which is on fantasy calc. He's like wide receiver 25. I'd say he's probably about similar on KTC.
Yeah. I think that's fair. I like that way of looking at it. All right. Last question related to these running backs. I know where you stand on Cook and White. Are you still no hesitation taking Devon Achane over Kyren Williams?
Without a doubt. I mean, okay. Devon Achane for me is probably closer to the Bijan CMC Gibbs group than he is the Kyren Williams group. So,
and is that based on is that like a talent based kind of evaluation for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's just supremely talented. And if I'm working with somebody on like Kyren Achan type of deal, I would
Mm,
kick a little bit and take, like if I did like a Kyren and a 2 for Achan and a 3 type of move, I wouldn't want to make an
right.
early 2, but if it's like if I'm a contender this year, if it's like a late 2, I'd be
Sure.
good with that.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with you. I still have HN ahead of those guys. But I definitely think in some leagues you're gonna see that really starting to come together just because, Achan, he's dealt with the injuries. Now he's not really getting like goal line. He's kind of being worked in as more of a complimentary back right now. I think that's probably due to health. And I think, they're sort of riding a hot hand with Mostert. So I'm not really concerned about him long term, but I definitely think there are going to be managers that are antsy with him. And I think they could end up in kind of a similar range potentially in the offseason. So just something to keep an eye on. We definitely like to buy in on talent. Achan, I have no doubts in the talent there. So something to keep an eye on if you want to stay within the running back position and maybe insulate yourself with talent and in a great offense as well. So we're gonna wrap things up here with our last real segment, which is about something you've been doing over on Twitter or the website formerly known as Twitter, where you've been making these charts. And I think these charts are really cool. So I'm going to just kind of break down what you're doing here, and then I'll let you correct anything I get wrong and kind of talk about your process here and why you've made these charts, what you're trying to capture and everything. But basically, it's a scatter plot. So we've got a big square along the x-axis, the bottom of the chart. You've got a metric here, which is Whopper. So remind me what that stands for, real quick.
So Whopper is weighted opportunity rating. So it's a combination of target share and air yard share.
Gotcha. Okay, weighted opportunity. I was trying to figure out what the P stood for. It's just opportunity. So
Yeah,
okay,
so
got it.
air yard share, just in case anybody's not familiar, is basically the air yards that your quarterback throws per game. So if he's throwing 400 air yards during the game and your receiver gets 100 of those air yards, then it's a 25% air yard share.
Gotcha. So that's air yard share and target share combined, Whopper, and that's divided by PFF receiving grade. So sort of a quantity and quality mixed together there in that metric, and that's along the x-axis. And then vertically, you have age. And so what you've done is you've taken basically every fantasy relevant wide receiver, and each one gets a little point on the chart. Vertically, they're positioned by their age, and then horizontally positioned by this combination metric of weighted opportunities and PFF receiving grade. And then what you've done, so all those points there on the chart, you went and drew these nice colorful circles around different kind of cohorts. So you have these circles, and inside each circle, it captures maybe 6, 7, 8, 10 wide receivers. And then you've kind of labeled these and it's sort of a really interesting way of looking at tiers. Instead of just being kind of a linear tiering system, you have these like bubbles of wide receivers that fit into different archetypes. And so I think that's a really cool way of looking at it. But I want to just turn it over to you first. Talk about this chart and what you're trying to do with it.
Yeah, so if you're listening along and you want to see what we're talking about here, so the one that I think Paul is referring to is from December 6th. So if you want to pull that from my Twitter at Dynasty SFlex, just to kind of look along here. So yeah, I try to do like almost like stats that are like analytics for dummies in a sense, because it's easier for me to think about, and I think it's more digestible for the viewer and or listener. And so if you start looking at these from like a statistical view, it's probably like, oh, this is like fake analytics in a sense. Like this is like the circles that I'm drawing are not like perfect. So like I think somebody commented like you're gerrymandering around like
Right.
certain areas. But basically what I'm doing is I'm circling clusters together that seem like that they are close. So like if you look at if you followed along here in the bottom right, there's a red circle that has all of our youngest and most productive players. So guys with very high Whopper and PFF receiving grades, and they are young players. And you've got guys like CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Garrett Wilson, Puka Nakua falls into that grouping.
Right.
And then another one that I find interesting is DJ Moore, kind of falls in that grouping. So if I'm thinking about like the way to digest this and to maybe make it usable, I would almost like think about it as like this whole thing is like a crime scene.
Mhm.
And basically like everything seems like it's in its right spot. Like when you look at players like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like the towels on the hook, the pillows are on the bed. You can see that Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase are near each other. You can see that Devontae Adams, Mike Evans, and Keenan Allen, they're near each
Right.
other. So what I'd be looking for is who seems misplaced and who is out of value based on this chart. And so when I look at this one, like DJ Moore feels like he's misplaced. Misplaced within the chart probably means that
Right.
he's misplaced from a dynasty value. And so that might mean DJ Moore is a buy. DeAndre Hopkins jumped out at me on this one. So DeAndre Hopkins is near guys like Keenan Allen, Devontae Adams, Mike Evans, Stephon Diggs. To me, that might mean that in this offseason, can you get DeAndre Hopkins for almost like a throw-in in a trade? Can you get him for
Right.
like a really late 2? And he could be your Mike Evans of 2024 if he gets a new situation. So those are the types of things that I'm looking for in these charts of who's
Right.
misplaced within the crime scene.
Yeah, I absolutely love that way of thinking about it. It's you can also think of it as just like, does the chart pass the smell test, right? Like you said, you're looking for these points of kind of confirmation. I've seen it on Twitter as like Mahomes top right. Like
Yeah,
if you make a quarterback chart and Mahomes is in the top right, it's probably good. And like if he's not, then it's probably garbage. So it's kind of that idea of like, are guys where they should be? But yeah, I think these things you pointed out, those are just two examples of where you can kind of maybe spot market inefficiencies or figure out which players are due for maybe better production in the future or something like that. I have to say with DJ Moore, I'm pretty upset that I held all the DJ Moore for absolute just like years and years in Carolina.
same.
Like I was like, this dude is he's amazing. Like one day it's all gonna work out for him. And then he went to Chicago and I was like, well, that's it, guys. It's over. Sorry. I'm gonna just sell all my shares. They're gonna throw 28 times per game. And they're not going to be
Here we
accurate
are.
passes. And here we are. And now he's going to get Caleb Williams in the offseason. So, I guess
They're going
I
to get
guess I
Caleb
should have.
Williams and Eric Bieniemy. They're going to throw it 45 times per game, and he's going to be the next Cooper Cup,
Yeah,
Stephon Diggs.
and this is why you don't trade Drake London, by the way. This is why you don't trade away Drake London. You just hold him because one day he's going to go to another horrible team and you think it's over, but it's actually going to be amazing. And then he's going to get, I don't know, Arch Manning Jr. or whoever. And then you're going to be like, man, I wish I had Drake London now. So that's great. Is there anything else that you wanted to point out? Obviously, it's better if people go look at the chart. I'll say that again. Go follow Todd. Go check out the chart. Hopefully, he's going to make another one for us soon because this one goes up to week 13. So I think we're going to need like a
Yeah,
week
I'll
15
get
version.
I'll get the week 15 version. The one thing I'd probably call out, and you asked me about it, and I'm going to jump the gun. You asked me like who would be my buy, and I've mentioned being pretty high on Nico Collins earlier. If you look in the blue circle here, Nico Collins is sitting right next to the guys that I said that I was in the same tier with, which was Devontae Adams, Jalen Waddle, DK Metcalf, Michael Pittman, Drake London. He's in that tier of players. So if I've got a Devontae Smith or a Jalen Waddle, can I trade those guys and get Nico in a second? I would
Yeah.
smash accept that. That's the type of deal that I'm going to be trying to look at in the offseason. Nico Collins has the Joe Burrow, the Patrick Mahomes type of passer that can elevate to a top 5 season. And
Mhm.
so I am fully all in on the Nico Collins train. And I know, Paul, you have always been on the Nico Collins trade, at least from what I remember. So I'm probably
Mhm.
just preaching to the choir here.
Well, I drafted him a lot this year in best ball. I definitely I was kind of in on him in his rookie season, and then I was like, I guess he's not really anything. Um, and then it was Jacob that put me back onto him this offseason. So I did pick up a good number of shares. I think I drafted him in like every startup I did this offseason. So that's been great. I did end up trading him to you in one league along with my first for Brees Hall. And like, I don't know. I got the 1 seed in that league. So
Yeah.
Like, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I got some
And
flack for that trade when I made it.
yeah,
I was really trying to get off of Brees Hall. I was a total rebuild. I mentioned I had a bunch of 101s or 102s. I got the 102 in that league, and I was really trying to get out of Brees Hall because of like I don't want to just like him tear his ACL again and me
right.
be holding the bag as a tanker. So I was. This was like week 6, kind of before, maybe even 4 or 5 before Nico really, hit the next stride. So I kind of
Yeah.
took the gamble. I think ultimately it's worked out as an even trade, even though
Mhm.
I've probably built some value since then. But your team has flourished, and you got the
Right.
1 seed. So if you like we talked about variance earlier, if you were to win like your 8 other matchups and lost that one, I wouldn't be too upset about it.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm going up against a really tough team this week. I did end up trading Brees Hall pretty much straight up for Christian McCaffrey.
Mhm.
So I'm riding with McCaffrey, and we'll see how it goes. But yeah, I think we both benefited from that trade. Obviously, helps that Nico continued to elevate. But if they don't, my only concern with Nico is like I do think Tank Dell is maybe more talented. Just based on what he was able to do, like as a rookie versus Nico in year 3. I know they're not that far
I
apart
have
in
them taking
age.
that tier
Mhm.
as well.
My concern is what happens if they do go out and pursue like a Brandon Ayuk or a T Higgins or something, and what does that do to the consolidation of the offense? I think that Nico's good enough to like hold his own and maintain like a solid role. I don't think T Higgins is like leaps and bounds better than him, but it would concern me if the offense became that crowded. And I don't know how they view Nico just because like he was a third round pick from the last regime. Um, are they going to look at Nico and tank and just kind of rest on their laurels and just let that ride at the position? I think that would be fine. I think that would work. I'm just not totally sure what they're going to do, but I'm not really digging him for it significantly. Like I totally think he's in that wide receiver, like 16, 17 kind of range probably. But that's just one thing that gives me a little bit of pause.
Yeah, so like Nico Collins is wide receiver, or he's the wide receiver 11 on PFF receiving grade. So that's something that kind of point to. So he's in that grouping with on that chart, like I said. I just think I think he's supremely talented, and I would have a really hard time seeing them bring someone in that would really clutter things up. I think they can kind of get by with the Noah Browns of the world in that wide receiver 3 range. But I think we could probably play the game that any team could bring in T. Higgins and it could mess things up. And
Right.
so I'm going to try to lean into people's concerns on that and try to potentially add more Nico this offseason. I will say this: people that have him are pretty high on him, so it's not quite as easy as maybe looking at Fantasy Calc and saying wide receiver 25 is what I have to pay. I think you probably have to pay closer to those
Mhm.
prices that where you have him, like in the wide receiver 16 to 18 range, which is I
Right.
think if you traded like a Devontae or a Waddle and got Nico in it too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. The one fundamental flaw with something like Fantasy Calc is that its values are based on completed trades, and so like
Right.
if you go to someone in your league, a lot of the price you're going to get is contingent on whether they are inclined to trade that player, and if they're inclined to trade that player, then you're going to get a lower price. Like I could be talked into trading Nico Collins, but because I don't already have the predisposition to do so, my price is not going to match the fantasy calc price. It's going to be higher. So you have to find the managers that are already kind of like, yeah, I'll deal this guy. Like, yeah, I'm looking at, if they put him on the trade block, maybe you'll get that price. But if you're the one initiating it, you're probably gonna have to pay higher. And I think you can. Like, I think you can definitely pay higher. He does belong in that Pittman kind of Metcalf range in my mind.
Yeah,
So
on our podcast, with the opening line is yesterday's price is not today's price. So
right.
I think here at some point we're going to say yesterday's price is not today's price on Nico Collins, and people are going to have him bumped up into that wide receiver 15 range.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very likely. All right. Well, there's a ton of cool stuff on this chart that we could talk about, but I genuinely think it's just easier to see. And Todd does write up a lot of stuff about it underneath, about each of the different color coded cohorts. So go check it out on his feed. I think he said December 6th was the date. Hopefully a new one will be up sometime soon that you can
I
check
got you.
out and you go follow him. It is really cool. So lots you could figure out from that. You can maybe come up with some trade ideas based on who's in what cohort. But that's how we'll close things up today. You said you were someone you were going to be buying.
Nico Collins. We
Nico
just talked about
Collins,
him. Yep.
and also
Uh,
maybe DJ Moore if you can buy. I'm gonna actually try and
yeah.
get some DJ Moore this offseason just from an emotional perspective. I don't want to feel like I missed the boat on the quarterback upgrade finally coming in. So I'm gonna maybe make some irresponsible trades for DJ Moore, but if you can go and get him for a reasonable price, I do think his position on this chart and what he's done this season does show that he does have all that potential we once talked about. And maybe he's going to be the guy that ages kind of like Stephon Diggs, where he starts out, it looks really promising. Maybe the points aren't there. Finally gets into that golden sort of situation, age 27, and then just rips off, top 5 season, top 5 season, top 5 season. That seems very much in the range of outcomes.
So the three guys, like from an age standpoint, it would probably be like Nico, the younger one, DJ Moore, the middle one, DeAndre Hopkins, the older one, based on the chart.
Yeah. I love that. All right. Awesome. Well, Todd, it has been great having you on the show. Everything I could have hoped for. Of course, I knew that you knew your stuff from the Dynasty Market Watch podcast. Anybody listening, you should go check that out. Maybe you'll hear me on there someday. Love to get on, talk some trades. That's just me guilt tripping you into inviting me on by saying it in front of a bunch of people. But otherwise, yeah, go follow Todd at Dynasty SFlex. You can follow me on Twitter at Paul_DFF. And Todd, any final thoughts before we go ahead and get out of here?
No, I think this is a lot of fun. We'll definitely have you on this offseason where we completed a podcast earlier today talking some of the 2023 rookies. So that'll be out probably on the 19th or the 20th. So Tuesday or Wednesday. So that's the latest that we've done on the Dynasty Market Watch podcast, along with my hosts, Brian O'Leary and Matt Davis.
Awesome. Can't wait to listen to it. Hopefully by the time I come on, I'll be bragging about a victory in that league where that we were talking about. Fingers crossed. But if not, you'll get a higher draft pick. Anyway, thank you guys so much for listening to the Factory Tour. If you could support the show in any way, you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a like, leave a comment, ask a question. If you're on Spotify or Apple, if you could rate the show, anything helps. But just listening is great too. So we appreciate you. And I'll be back next week.